Good evening, everybody. Um, Welcome to South Boston by Map. If you are just tuning in, we're about to get started. And I'm here with the South Boston Branch Communications and Outreach Librarian. Is that your title, Kathleen?
Yes, Outreach and Programs Librarian.
Outreach and Programs from the South Boston Branch. So Kathleen, is there anything you want to say about tonight or about the South Boston Branch, or you guys are open, right?
Yes, so if people have questions about the South Boston Branch, please feel free to reach out. People may not realize we are open, so people can come in with a mask on, and we have computers and books and things like that. We don't quite have programs yet, so we're not quite back to normal, but hopefully we'll be updating that soon. And I just want to welcome everyone. We're so excited to have Rachel from the Leventhal Map Center come talk to us about South Boston and the history of geography and other things here in South Boston. So take it away, Rachel.
Thank you so much, Kathleen. So I want to start with a brief land acknowledgement. The land that we work on, that we live in and discuss in these programs is traditional and ancestral land of Native peoples. What is now the city of Boston, European settlers called the Shawmut Peninsula. But before that, Algonquian speakers called it Mashawomic. It was and is home to groups including the Mashpee and Aquinnah-Wampanoag tribes, the Nipmuc Nations, and descendants of the Massachusetts people. The collection of the Leventhal Map and Education Center includes maps that reflect or were direct tools of colonial expansion and native erasure and dispossession. The urban atlases we're about to discuss record property ownership in the 19th and 20th centuries, a time period often thought of as long after colonization in New England. But colonialism is an ongoing process, both in the times these maps were created and today. These atlases omit addressing previous or contemporaneous Native groups. They were produced during the same period that settlers and the government were violently dispossessing Native people of their lands in other parts of the continent. So the land we're standing on today, much like the land that's documented in these atlases, cannot be understood without acknowledging the expropriation and genocide which took place during colonization. This land acknowledgement is just a little acknowledgement. It's really nothing more than that. But hopefully this kind of thing is a seed for change in the ways that we interact both with land and the legacies of settler colonialism. If you've never taken a look, I'm going to put something in the comments, which is a website that's a digital mapping project called Native Land. I highly recommend checking it out. You can post in the comments if you're tuning in from outside of Boston. You can put in your zip code and tell us whose land you're on tonight. And you can also see treaties and language groups on that website. So I'm going to head into our scheduled program, and we're going to say goodbye to Kathleen for a little bit. Then we're going to talk about South Boston. So I want to start out by saying I'm not an expert in South Boston history. I'm not an expert in geography really either, but I am probably one of the leading experts in the tool that I'm going to show you tonight, which is called Atlascope. And it's the way that we're going to kind of talk about South Boston and historical geography together. So we're going to start by talking about what are urban atlases, which are the books that we digitized to create this project. There are these huge books. They're like 2 feet by 3 feet. They have, they're really old. They're from the late 19th, early 20th centuries, and they're unwieldy. So they're large, they're beautiful, but they're difficult to work with, especially if you want to compare one to another one. You have to flip to the right page of each one. Sometimes the pages don't correspond to the exact same geographical area from one year to the next year. So they're these like big, beautiful, and difficult to use books. They have a lot of really dense information. So this is a key from a Sanborn atlas in 1875. These atlases were originally created for a couple different purposes. One is as fire insurance atlases, and one is as real estate atlases. So this one in particular is a fire insurance atlas. It's got the type of building material color-coded, the type of building, so stables are crossed out. There's a bunch of information like window openings, openings in division walls and partitions, skylights, windows. All of this stuff is stuff you might want to know if you're trying to decide how much to insure a property for. So that's on the property atlases. The information that a lot of people are actually looking for when they use these for genealogy and stuff like that is the names on the properties. There is a caveat that the people who lived in the houses aren't necessarily the people who own the properties. So I usually use, when I'm doing like genealogical research with Atlascope, I cross-reference with something like Ancestry that has the digitized census information, so that I can see who actually lived in a building and not just the person who owned the building. Because what you want to know is information about largely renters in history. So I've told you about these atlases, which are these huge books, and I've told you that they're difficult to use, but I want to show you how we're going to use them tonight and how you can use them in the future to learn about the history of your neighborhood, the history of your house, the history of your family, and how we're going to explore South Boston tonight, which is through this tool called Atlascope. We've digitally transformed over 100 layers of atlases covering Boston and the surrounding areas from 1861 to 1938. There do exist atlases from later than 1938, but they are under copyright still. So there's like a 72-year, I guess 1939 now, there's a 72-year period that you have to wait before you can bring something into the public domain. So before we did Atlascope, we had, if you looked up a specific atlas in our collections, you would have each page show up individually, and then so you'd have to click on one, explore it digitally, and then click on the next one and see like, oh no, the property that I want is just over the line onto the next plate. That would be very inconvenient. So what we've done is basically stitch all of these plates together into one big map. Different areas of Boston have different coverage. So South Boston is covered by 8 atlases from 1874 to 1919, but downtown Boston has 18 atlases. And I recommend that you actually go to the website right now. I'll type the link into the chat. It's atlascope.leventhalmap.org. And you can do it on your phone, your tablet, or your computer. Any internet accessing device will work. And you'll be faced with 3 choices to start with. So Find Me, Search Places, or Start at BPL. Find Me is really fun. You can use that to actually track where you are. So if you were walking the streets of South Boston, you could click Find Me and it would follow you along, and you could say like, oh, this building looks really interesting, or it has an interesting inscription in it. I wonder if it, what it used to be. You could click Find Me and it'll drop right down on your location and you can find out. You can also search places, which is what we're going to do tonight, or Start at BPL, which brings you to Copley. So we're going to search places. If you type in, for example, South Boston Library, you will come up with South Boston Library at 646 East Broadway Street, South Boston, Ma, 02127 USA. So when you type something in, you can type in points of interest, you can type in street addresses, you can type in a specific street or a street intersection, but only addresses that exist today are places that you can look up. And then it'll drop you in the oldest possible atlas layer for that search that you've done. So we searched South Boston Library. It dropped us right on that location. And you can see that in 1874, it was actually a City of Boston building. Down here in the bottom right-hand corner is where it shows you what year the atlas is for the overlay map. And you can see that the base map that it's using is a modern street map of Boston. You can actually change what year you're looking at. So there's a drop-up list here from 1874. You can drop up and then choose a different year. So I chose 1885 to compare to. And this is like a slightly different format of map. This is what a lot of them look like with this kind of yellow and pink color scheme. The yellow homes are wood and the pink buildings are brick. And you can see that I zoomed in here. This is the Lincoln School. So the building where the South Boston branch is now used to be a school called the Lincoln School. So I want to have you try it out yourself. This is going to be interactive, whether you want it to or not. So go to atlascope.leventhalmap.org. And then I want you to tell me what institution used to be at 553 East Broadway in South Boston. So you can answer in the comments. Or you can see my little hopeful plea answer in the comments. And anybody can answer. Let me know if you're having trouble using the software. But basically, you're going to go to atlascope.leventhalmap.org, click Search Places, and then type in 553 East Broadway. And then make sure you select, if there's multiple options, make sure you select the one in South Boston. Because sometimes there are multiple options. One time I was doing research on somewhere that was on a school street, and there were so many options in the Boston area of places that are on school streets. Because there's a school street in Newton, there's one in Cambridge, there's one in Somerville, there's one in Boston. They're everywhere. So I'm going to give people a little bit more time in case this is alien to use. I understand. I've been using it for a long time because it's been out for like a year and a half now to the public for you to use. And Karen has the answer. Perkins Institute for the Blind. So does Verissima Productions. Perfect. So the Perkins Institute for the Blind Asylum was there in 1874. This building was like really high off the street. I was reading about the history of it, and at some point in the 19th century, the streets were actually brought down like 15 feet. So there's this huge ramp leading up to the building and staircase leading up to the building that seemed like very inconvenient for an institution for the blind, to me, at least. There's some great pictures in Digital Commonwealth, which is another resource that I'm going to show you tonight, of people making things in the adult workshop at the Perkins Institute in South Boston when it was there. There was like, I think, pottery and woodworking and all sorts of other like kind of workshop activities. So we're going to explore South Boston a little bit. We're going to start as we should with the library. The original South Boston branch of the Boston Public Library was at 372 West Broadway, I believe. And it was right next to the Boston Savings Bank in a Masonic building that used to be on the site of a church. If you want to know more about any of these maps ever, you can click About This Map in the bottom right-hand corner. And then all of this information will pop up. So you have all this metadata, Atlas of the County of Suffolk, Massachusetts, published in Philadelphia by G.M. Hopkins and Company, year 1874, and the hosting institution, which is us. And then you have all these options to download footprints if you want to do something with this yourself in a mapping software. You can find the plate boundaries and Atlas extents or a list of plates in the digital collections. For this one, last time I did this, I showed people how to find the key in the digital collections page for the Atlas, but this time I couldn't find actually a key for this like green and gray 1874 Atlas, but instead in the back I found the business listings section, and I found this like amazing ad for Vegetine, the great blood purifier. So this has nothing really to do with South Boston, but it is in the South Boston Atlas from 1874. Vegetine purifies the blood, renovates and invigorates the whole system. Its medical properties are alterative, tonic, solvent, and diuretic. And there was a very long ad for this, so it seems like a great remedy. If anybody's not feeling too well tonight, we know what you need. But there are maps that do have good keys in this collection, including this 1875 one, which is actually the key that I showed you before. Here is the library in this Masonic building. The Masonic rooms are on the 3rd and 4th floors, you can see here. The library is on the 2nd. There's a cast iron tubular boiler, which you can see here in black. And so steam boilers are black lines. There's a skylight here. You can see these two concentric rectangles that correspond to this in the key. It's a pink building, which means it's brick, and this one next door is pink on the outside and green on the inside, which means brick special hazard. There's one more thing. Oh yeah, the window openings. So I think that this is just like the most detailed, most incredible thing is these little symbols for window openings. There are these like, you can see that it has 4 floors, these 4 little lines, and each one has a dot, which means there are window openings on each floor. And then at the back of the building, there's also these 4 lines, but there's only window openings on the 2nd and 4th floors. So this is the kind of detail that you can get out of these atlases. This one in particular is a very detailed one. Some of them are not, but this is a great place to start and a great place to do your research on buildings and on the people who lived in them. Here's a picture from Digital Commonwealth of the building. You can see here it's a bank for these 2 kind of chunks of the building, and then this 3rd chunk is the public library, and I zoomed in here so you can see public library. It says Masonic Apartments on this side here, and then Public Library South Boston branch. And I believe the South Boston branch of the Boston Public Library is the 2nd branch library in the United States. So, got a lot of history there. The newer South Boston branch library building that replaced it, there was an intermediate one between the one that you can see on Atlascope and the one that exists today. But the one that exists today was to replace that old South Boston branch and the City Point South Boston branch, which was in the South Boston Municipal Building right here on East Broadway. And there's a picture of it here. I believe the library was on the 2nd floor, but I could be wrong. And that right there became or became the land that became the municipal building was land that belonged to the Perkins Institution beforehand, and then Perkins moved to Watertown. There are a lot of other institutions in South Boston over the years, including this psychiatric hospital and a prison. Quite a few, I don't know how you would say this, like, I don't know, manufacturing corporations, including New England Confectionery Company. I have a whole slew of information about candy making in Boston. If you're interested, there's like so much information about candy production in Boston and in Cambridge also. And throughout the 20th century, it was, it was a huge, huge industry in Boston. So I'm gonna paste that here. And and Kathleen has told me in the back channel that in fact there were 3 library branches in South Boston at one point, because there was Andrew Square, City Point, and the South Boston branch on West Broadway. So very well resourced area in terms of library connections. So this is the Necco building today. It's no longer a candy manufacturing plant, but as you'll find if you take that candy tour that I posted in the chat, most of the candy manufacturing plants that existed in the 20th or early 20th, late 19th centuries are apartments today, or like kind of business complexes. The thing that I thought was the most interesting that I didn't know was in South Boston before I perused Atlascope for a while was that there was an aquarium in South Boston. So there was an aquarial park, I guess, in the 19th century in Boston. And then there wasn't one for like 50 years. And then in 1912, the city built this aquarium in South Boston, which I think is a really beautiful building, like a really cute little building. This image was, I think, on Digital Commonwealth as well. And here's a little fish from historic New England that was from that aquarium. There was no label for what kind of fish this was, but I thought it was adorable. So this aquarium was open from, I believe, 1912 to 1954. And then after it closed, it was replaced in the 60s by the New England Aquarium that we all know and love and like to go see the harbor seals at. And then finally, South Boston has been home to a lot of breweries over the years. This is, I think, the 1874 atlas showing Mount Washington brewers. And I chose this one because it shows 2 things. It shows the like brewing history of South Boston and Boston in general, and also it shows the land making history. So right here, you can see that there's water on the bottom half of this little spyglass, but there are property lines that extend out into the water. And right here, it says flats, and then it says a long number, 1,000 or 118,000. So this is all mud flats, tidal flat areas that would have been land at low tide and water at high tide. And what happened was it got filled in, as did so much of the land surrounding Boston, especially in East Boston, in Back Bay, the Mill Pond are 3 of the really big historical land-making ventures in Boston. But you can see even here in South Boston, the land was created. So you can see that today on the modern map, there's a road here, and then there's this strandway. So Mount Washington Brewery became Suffolk Brewing Company. And I found this really beautiful advertisement of Suffolk Brewing Company Incorporated, 1875, on 8th Street in Boston. What do the numbers represent? Somebody asked, which is a really good question. The numbers, like this really long number, I believe represents how much square footage the flats take up that belong to this person. Because the reason that I think that is because these numbers here, which are written in the same style, represent the size of a, what would you call it? The size of a plat, or a property. So like this right here is 7,297 square feet. That's a great question. If anybody has other questions about these maps, we're going to kind of move into a question and answer or atlascope exploration period of the talk. After we look at this just like stunning lithograph from the Boston Pictorial Collections, which is of South Boston, and I think it's just beautiful. And it's got these like, this is really typical of bird's eye views and aerial views, that you can see this like beautiful view of the city, and then it shows you little vignettes, usually fancy buildings from the area or little like this little sailing picture. I really love that. So I'm going to stop sharing this and start sharing an atlascope window. Okay. So we're in South Boston here. You can really see, oops, I can't see, but hopefully you can see all of the, like the shape of South Boston kind of here. This is an 1891 atlas over a 1919 atlas. So if anyone has questions, including like if you want me to look up your address or an address that's important to you or your family historically, I am very happy to do that. I think that's a good place to start because it kind of shows people how to use this and what kind of focuses on what matters to them. But we can also kind of scroll around and look at other parts of the city. Let me zoom back in and make this a modern background so that we can compare it to what we actually know. There are, something that I noticed, here's a really great kind of dock side view of a bunch of different industries that were really important to South Boston. So there's a coal and wood yard here. There's a fish curing works, South Boston Gas Light Company, and Bay State Brewery, all right one after another. And Bay State Iron Works. This is right next to the asylum and the prison. So if anybody knows anything about the asylum or the prison, I really wanted to learn more about them, but I couldn't find much about the asylum because it was very hard to find anything besides the Canton. There's a lunatic hospital in Canton, I think, that kept popping up. Kathleen, do you want to be added back in? Yes? Okay. Hey.
Hi there.
I figure Kathleen knows more than I do about South Boston, so it's good to have her on if people have any questions.
I do know a little bit. I am not an expert in South Boston history. That would definitely be. I don't know if we have anybody from the Historic Society on, but their events go really do a deep dive into South Boston history. I can say that I believe the records for the psychiatric hospital are at the City of Boston. City of Boston does have their own archives for institutions that were run by the city. So, and those stretch back all the way to the beginning. So,
And that's really, like, to me, that's a history that you really do get from Atlascope as an institutional history of Boston. So you can see like schools, hospitals, churches are a really clear indication of who lived in a neighborhood, especially churches and schools. You can see like what was important to the people who lived in that neighborhood. So someone has said that their dad was born at the Lying In Hospital in 1933 and that his family lived at 12 Morris Street at the time. So let's look for 12 Morris Street. So I'm going to hit search places. And this is in Dorchester Center in 1874. Your dad probably was not born in 1874. So let's jump to 1933. And we can see that 12 Morris Street was owned by E.F. and M.J. Buckley at the time. What I would do next, if the Buckleys are not your ancestors, the next thing that I would do would be to go to Ancestry. Right now, you can still log into the BPL proxy, web proxy, and look for example, like the address, and then you can find out like what years people lived there, how old, like if like I found out something that I didn't know about my grandma, which is that she lived with her grandfather for a while in her family home. He was on the census, and I didn't know that before I looked it up. So you can find out who lived with your dad by doing that. This is actually a really funny example because for once, 12 Morris Street is actually exactly the same address today as it was back then. What you'll find often in Atlascope is that like street numbering has changed over the years and over the decades. So sometimes there are sometimes this would be like 24 Morris Street. And that's why the map is actually really important, because it tells you the address that you should be looking up in historical documents, which is not the address that you have for today. Judith asked, can you search by a person's last name? In Ancestry, yes, not in Atlascope yet. So someday, hopefully, you'll be able to search text from Atlascope, but today that's not possible yet. You can only search addresses and points of interest that exist today, unfortunately. Karen says, my grandmother grew up in East Boston and talked about the East-South rivalry, though she said it was friendly. There was even a song for the Eastie girls. That's pretty funny. Yeah, I mean, South Boston has like a very rich and long history. It's been, like the home of kind of wealthy people who wanted to get out of the city proper at the beginning, and then it became a part of Boston proper with the landfill and became a home for immigrants. So it's really like run the gamut of like who has lived there and what types of people have lived there over the years. I do want to show you Where's my window? I lost my window. I do also want to show you Digital Commonwealth, which is where I pulled a lot of the images from for tonight. So Digital Commonwealth is basically like a compendium of resources from across the state of Massachusetts. So it's got collections from tons of libraries and museums and archives, including our maps are in this collection, and all of Boston Public Library's collections are in here. Especially the photography collection is like very useful. So if you wanted, for example, to search South Boston, you find a massive amount of photography. This is from the South Boston branch. This is the reading room, which I probably should have guessed from all the people reading. But yeah, so Digital Commonwealth is a really wonderful resource. All of our maps are in here, but you should also know about our actual website and our collection site, which is collections.leventhalmap.org. You could also search South Boston here. And you would get all sorts of beautiful maps, including the atlases that we've been talking about tonight, which is really useful. So like this one is one of the ones that I showed you, the 1874 one, or 1875. We have a bunch of new maps in our collection that they're not new maps, but they're new to us. From the Boston Redevelopment Authority. And some of these are from South Boston. So these are maps from the Boston Redevelopment Authority, which is the precursor to the BPDA. Really a lot of urban renewal came through Ed Logue and the BPDA, the BRA, before the Boston Planning and Development Authority. So there are these really great like urban renewal area R56 zone district changes. So these are maps that really show that mapping can be like projected or like future, like people make maps of the future that they want to create and not just maps of the present that exists, which I think is really interesting because that's so true of maps of the present really as well, is that we're creating maps that of the way that we want things to be and not necessarily the way that they are. So yeah, you can see that all of these have been folded. That's a common theme among all of these maps, is that they have been folded in weird ways and they are discolored, but they're really useful. I really like this one of the population density. I think each dot is for 20 people. Yeah. And this is based on the 1960 census. This is also back when there was this really great stamp for the Boston Public Library collections with the lanterns. But yeah, if anybody has any more questions, I'm happy to answer them. Otherwise, we can kind of like peruse Atlascope at our leisure. I'm going to go back to South Boston. I actually love that when you search South Boston, it drops you right at this corner, which is where the original library branch was. I think that's beautiful. And this is also one of my favorite maps, actually, one of my favorite atlases, because it's so detailed and it's got like the names of every business down the street. So like, here's the oil store, here's the plumber, here's the painter, there's a schoolroom right there. There's a bakery across the street and a carpentry and paint shop. All of these S's stand for store. And that means that there's a store on the ground floor. Oh, somebody just asked about editing a map. No, unfortunately, that was about editing my map set, which is something that you should know about, actually. That's a really fun feature that we have. So this wants me to, because it's on our website, it wants to take me back to editing my map set, which is a map set about, drum roll, please, if it will take me back there. A map set about map monsters. So we we have this really great feature that I think is really brilliant, which is that you can make a map set of all of the maps that you want to show somebody. So we have teachers use this feature, and it's I basically like collected all of the maps that have map monsters on them and put them in one place because we have so many, and I probably didn't even catch them all, but that's what that was. While we're goofing around, I'm going to give you one more piece of information, which is that something that we really value is knowing what we're doing well and what we're not doing well. So I want you to fill out this form about the event and what we can do better and what we did well tonight. But while you're filling that out, I'm going to go back to Atlascope. So yeah, so this is one of my favorite layers for South Boston is the 1885 Atlascope layer. Here's an old vacant waste storage storage of cotton bales. A varnish manufactory and pitch boiling in the back. So you can imagine that that is something that is like really important to know if you're going to be insuring a building, that they are just straight up boiling pitch in the back, because that's not super fire safe. There's a saloon and a bakery right here on these corners across the street from each other. Yeah, I think that the 1885 one in particular is like one of the most useful ones. Here's a beautiful example. So on this waste manufactory storage is this like huge explanation of how this place works. So there's automatic sprinklers, the upper story of B sewing machines, ceiling, second story of A finished with wire netting, plastered, steam jets each floor of machine shop, automatic alarm, connected to engine house, steam kept up constantly, and water in hose of buildings, C and D. So yeah, like just a lot of information on these maps. Not all of this information is like super useful to us today, but I would say like some of it is, some of it can be. If you were looking up information about like cotton production in Boston, which I think is really relevant, it's a huge part of Boston's history. It's really important to like recognize our connection to slavery as well. Slavery in the South with cotton picking, and then after slavery was abolished, it's still like sharecropping, and all of that cotton is coming up to Boston and being manufactured into clothing and stuff like that here. So if you were doing research on that and you wanted the nitty-gritty of how it worked, these maps are like gold. But if you're just doing genealogy research, probably knowing that St. Augustine's Church is here is more interesting to you, and knowing that maybe your grandparents went there, maybe your parents went there, maybe they lived around here. So let me switch to a map layer that has people's names on it. So yeah, that would just be maybe more useful to you to look at a map that has first and last names. Something that I've found also that I've talked about in other sessions that maybe somebody here has some insight into is the really large number of like female landowners that I didn't expect before I started working with these maps. So you can even see it right here. Annie L. Rod and Florence E. Greed both own property right here behind the Shirtlift School. I guess I grew up kind of thinking like women didn't own property for a really long time in history. So I didn't expect that even before they got the right to vote, this map is from 1910, tons of women in Boston owned buildings. So I don't know, something to think about. If anybody is doing genealogy research or historical research, there's like a Grace here, a Mary, a Julia, all her heirs, a Mary, Annie, Lucy, Alice, Catherine, Mary, Elizabeth. It's like half the properties, which is not what I expected when I started doing this. So yeah, if there's anything that surprises you about this, anything that you ever want to pick someone's brain about, you can always email info@leventhalmap.org. And someone will get back to you shortly about whatever it is your question is. We also have research services. So if you are doing genealogical research or something else like that, you can always come to us with your research questions, and we will either find the maps to help you or find the place to get the maps to help you. We have really good maps of Boston. We don't always have really good maps of other places, although for many locations we do. So come to us with your map questions. That's pretty much all I have for tonight. But if you have any questions for me, just info@leventhalmap.org is the right place to go. Kathleen, do you have any programs coming up? You said that it's all remote, right?
Things are remote still right now, so stay tuned. Hopefully yeah, so we are still remote in terms of programs, but hopefully we'll be able to host in-person programs soon. So definitely, if you have questions, feel free to call the branch. We're always happy to answer questions, help using the Leventhal website if you just want to come to the branch and take a look, or you wanted a little help using Ancestry. We're always happy to guide people through those resources. So
yeah, so that's what the library is for. Hopefully that's what you use it for. If you're here, you probably already know that the library is the place for you to go for these questions. But yeah, we're always happy to help with map-based stuff, and the branch is always happy to help you with your non-map related research history stuff. And it's been a pleasure talking to everyone. So fill out the feedback form, and we'll see you next time.